everyone. I'm Jim Masters, and welcome to CUTV News. This is the show where we talk to today's top thinkers from all around the world to bring you information, inspiration, and thought-provoking ideas that you can put to use in your personal or professional life right now. Today, my special guest is Dr. Andrea Luoma, executive coach and founder of Accommodator Consulting, where she provides neuroscience-based communication and leadership consulting and coaching. Dr. Luoma works primarily with CEOs and other senior leaders, directors, or managers to reimagine conversation and upgrade the conversation level of the whole organization. Now, her approach is based on the latest neuroscience that says traditional feedback puts a person into protect and defend mode, and the effects of the release of the stress hormone cortisol can last up to 26 hours. Dr. Luoma says she comes from the perspective that we are all emotionally wired the exact same way. Her approach is to encourage people to understand how the brain and body work for and against us in conversations, an idea most people have never really thought about. This learnable approach helps individuals gain awareness into themselves and what is happening in conversations that cause them to repel from one another or partner together. Dr. Luoma helps people truly alter their relationships with others as well as with themselves. Now, to discuss how she does this and more, she joins me in the CUTV News studio for this exclusive interview. Doctor, welcome to CUTV News. It's a pleasure to have you here. Thanks for coming clear across the country from beautiful Washington State to us here on the East Coast and the Northeast to join us in the studio today.
Thank you. It's really fantastic to be here.
So how was your trip? Really nice?
Great. Oh, it was great. Absolutely fantastic. It's lovely here in the Northeast.
You like to travel too, because you've met so many people. I know you've worked with clients that are not only in the United States, but beyond, right?
Absolutely, yes. A lot of clients in Europe and some in Asia as well.
That's fantastic. Well, let's talk about all of the work that you do. But first, I like to make my guests, as we talked about on the radio show, because we've done radio shows together as well, with you as my guest, and those were fantastic, about what inspires you. And over the years, obviously we have different sources of inspiration in our lives that sort of point us in the direction of the work that we do as we go along our journey. So for you, what are some of the things that inspired you to realize you were meant to do the kind of work you're doing now, which really impacts and touches people in such a vital and important way and long-lasting way?
I noticed immediately when I entered the workforce after I graduated from college that was the late 1980s when we cut middle management in this country by 85%, thinking there was always someone to fill a seat or the people who were left could do the job. And the sad reality of that now, when we look at what an absolute talent shortage we're in, but we treated people terribly, and I didn't understand. It made no sense to me. And people would think, why is she on this bandwagon of treat people well? And I thought, because that's how people perform. Treat people well, say please and thank you, say good morning and good evening. I mean, I've worked for a woman I will never forget who came into a meeting one time and she slammed her planner down on the table and said, the holidays are over, it's time to get back to work. We get to work at 8 and we leave at 5. And we go to lunch from 12 to 1. And she got exactly that. We were out the door, and it was like, why? And there's so much, I think, pent up insecurity is really what comes down to people that act that way. But my inspiration was really being treated poorly. And I had the fortunate experience to work for 5 bully bosses in a row, certifiably bully bosses in a row. And thank you to them now. Truly, I can say thank you because they learned from the experience. They made me who I am, and they made me realize I need to go help the world to be better at how they speak to people, how they communicate, how they get along, because the results that they want are not going to happen based on the way that they are delivering any information or interacting with anyone.
Well, kudos to you for surviving 5 bully bosses. Most people are wiped out after 1. Was it a challenge at all? It made you very resilient, I'm sure.
It made me resilient. I would never wish that on my worst enemy. Horrible experience, absolutely horrible, and yet the best thing that ever happened to me because it made me who I am today. And it made me realize what's important in that there can be a different way, and I can help people to understand there can be a different way.
So then that was a source of inspiration for you. What are some other things along the way that got you to realize that you were cut out to do the kind of work you're doing?
I taught in higher education for years, and I had a lot of students who over time, my student population over time went from a traditional age to a very much older age.
What were you teaching?
Mostly MBA programs and hospitality classes.
Sure.
And my students were older. They were on average about 38 years old to 38 to 40. And so if you think about that being average, there were plenty who were older than that.
Was it a second career for them?
Yes,
Yeah.
a lot of them, or people who really just wanted to get an MBA
Right.
and had never done that or never
Right.
pursued that. And so they were very much a source of inspiration. They would say, you have a gift, go give this to the world. And I would say, oh, but it's not really my stuff. And I take a little bit from here and I dabble in that and I put it all together. And of course, it took me a while to realize and remember that intellectual property is how you package it. And I think that's probably what makes me unique, is that I can bring things from a variety of different environments together and have people understand it and make sense out of it, and not just learn one particular dimension of something, but a variety of dimensions that really make for a more comprehensive whole.
So you've worked in the corporate world, you've worked in higher education. Do you see similarities in terms of the way systems are and the way things are presented and the way things operate in those two worlds? And did you pull a lot from both of those worlds, things to do and things not to do?
Yes. Yes, the difference is how the politics are played, I think. In the corporate world, the politics are played from the front. You see things coming at you. In the higher education world, you don't. They come from the back. And so it's just the way the game is played. It's played a little bit differently. Of course, you have a more specialized pieces of knowledge in higher education where people think they're all experts, and some of them certainly are. And then there's a lot of people who are just doing things that are very similar to other people as well. But yeah, I think the biggest difference to me in a corporate environment and in a higher education environment is how things come at you. And they're much more quick in a corporate environment. Things move at the speed of a nanosecond today.
Right, exactly. And there's so much change. And you're involved in changing, helping people really understand change and deal with change and work through change, right?
I am. And change is a really interesting thing, because to the brain, change means loss or death. And if nothing else, death of the way of thinking about something or doing something. So change is very, very frightening initially. People say they like change, and yet what I find is they like input, and they like stimulus, and they like to try things out and investigate. Real change, how do you go to work in the morning? How do you commute? Probably the exact same road or the exact same method every day. What do you eat for breakfast?
Yeah.
Probably one of two things. What restaurants do you eat in? Very, very similar, the things that we actually do. So
We're habitual.
Yeah, we're very habitual.
Routine.
We are very
things that
routine.
are in our comfort zone.
Yes, yes. People have a real challenge getting out of their comfort zone and realizing that they can. And a lot of the times the comfort zone is a mindset. We really create mental prisons for ourselves, and people need to be taught really how to think differently, and that they can think differently, that they're
Right.
not constricted by this voice in the head and what's going on in their heads. That could be very different.
And it's okay to think differently too, right?
Absolutely.
Sometimes we're told you shouldn't.
Yes, yes. And when people are telling us we shouldn't, it's usually because that's their stuff.
Yeah.
That's their stuff, or that's their insecurity or their vulnerability. And so sometimes we're a little bit farther than they are, and that makes them nervous or insecure, or they're doing it, maybe I should be doing it, or perhaps they shouldn't do it, so that way I don't look bad because I'm not doing it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a real interesting thing, how we communicate with people and interact with people, and whether they actually inspire us and support us or they constrict us.
So with all this background in corporate and higher education that you've fostered, you could have easily just rested on those laurels and said, okay, I'll retire and I'll do what I need to do, relax and enjoy. But you decided to branch out and create your own consulting company. Let's talk about that. What was your vision, your dream when you decided to do that?
It was...
Because that's changed too.
It has, and it was a requirement. Like, my heart was bursting to go do this. This is what I was truly meant to do. I loved my career in higher education. I have amazing students who have become amazing friends all over the world. Phenomenal experiences, but it wasn't enough. And And several people were a little bit sad that I left higher education,
Sure.
thinking you've done such a tremendous job. You help people, you inspire people, you get them into new careers and encourage them along the way. And yet I know that there's so many people in the organizational corporate world that are hanging on. I have 7 more years, I have 10 more years, I have golden handcuffs, and just until I retire, until I can sail off into the sunset. Well, 7, 8, 10 years, it's a long time to be miserable.
Right.
And it doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be that way, yet we don't really know how to make it different. And very much it's about how we think and how we interact and how we communicate, and it can be very different. And so for me, my heart was bursting to go help and assist and be a catalyst to help people have better organizations, better relationships. Ultimately, that's better efficiency, better bottom line, better peace of mind. And of course, all of it translates into the personal realm as well. Yet I stay in the professional corporate realm.
And there's a huge psychological component to all of this work, right?
100%. It's really about the psychological component of it. But we're not taught. We're not taught how to think differently. And that's a piece where I branched away from my communication and leadership background and fell into neuroscience. And so the neuroscience piece is the exciting part because it gives us language to think differently and to do things differently. And we know things, we understand things. We know if I go to shake your hand and you don't reach out to shake it back, or right there's a hesitancy, there's a whole lot of emotion that just went on there, and our bodies make that decision before our brains do. That's how fast this happens of, wait a minute, he didn't reach his hand out very quickly, he must not like me.
Right.
Or he might, we can go back to caveman and cavewoman times. Can I eat it? Will it eat me? Can I kill it? Will it kill me? Can I mate with it? Will it mate with me?
Either or, yeah, either or.
Now, we might be not using those language concepts in today's vernacular that our cavemen and women ancestors did, but conceptually it's the same. So we know if I stick my hand out to shake yours and you don't respond, something's not right. And then how do you change that in the moment to say, I've offended, I've hurt, I've embarrassed, whatever it might be, how can I recover right then and there, as opposed to let that one nanosecond of time impact weeks or months or even years sometimes.
So when you created the company, you had to find a name for it. Tell us about the meaning of the name and sort of the Latin connection.
Well, the name Accommodaire is Latin for the word adapt. And I don't think we really changed that much. If you think you changed, go back and see your high school friends. Better yet, go back and see your elementary school friends. The class clown is still the class clown, and the serious person is probably still the serious person. It's not to say that we can't.
Which were you?
I wasn't the class clown. Oh, it's funny.
Were you always focused? Were you always
I was pretty
headed
focused.
in a direction?
I was pretty focused. I was headed in a direction. I was very much came from a learning perspective, wanted to learn. As a child, there was a lot of puzzles and books and learn and investigate at a deeper level. And so that was really where my focus was and ultimately still is. But people don't really change that much. And not to say that you can't. People can adapt.
Right.
They can try things on, they can experiment, they can get curious. It's much easier. It's any of us, New Year's Day, we want to be healthy.
Sure.
We want a new
There's
eating
New
plan.
Year's resolutions all the time that nobody really sticks to.
Right.
And then we also have all these self-help books and all of these different videos and all these things that come at us. We look at them. If we even look at them, we get them. They stack them up on the coffee table.
Yes.
You don't look at them. And you think you're going to master all these really cool things, and nothing happens.
And then nothing happens typically is because we have to change the thought process. If we don't really get into the thought process of how to make the change and really to try it on and practice it, I mean, you can't learn to be a professional golfer from a book or listening to a TED Talk or listening to a podcast. To be a professional golfer, you have to go pick up a ball and a club and swing it.
And work and practice.
And a long time. And it's the same thing. So as much as we might read a great book, and we've all done it. We've read a great book. There's a million self-help books out there. And we think, this is great. And then we put it down and we move on to the next one. And what did we actually incorporate? And we didn't incorporate it because we don't change the thought process. And the thought process now, some of that goes back decades, some of it goes back lifetimes that you have to overcome that might not even be your thought process.
It might be what you've heard from the parents, the grandparents, the neighbors, whatever it may be, that you've absorbed.
That's right.
And you think that's the only way to be,
That's right.
the only way to respond, the only way to live.
That's right. And where this really comes from, this is some pretty fascinating stuff. Between the ages of 2 and 7, children are in complete theta waves in the way that their brains work. Babies between 0 and 2 are in delta waves. That's why they sleep, restorative, deep healing sleep. That's why babies are sleeping all the time. But children between 2 and 7 are in theta waves. And that's imagination. They've got imaginary friends. They're wearing capes or, having fairy wands. And anything's possible and anything's magical. But it's like being sponges and everything just comes in. There's no filter to say, oh, I don't want that, or oh, that was negative, or that felt uncomfortable. I don't need that in my head rolling around up there. And so whatever happens between 2 and 7 is what we're carrying now for the rest of our lives. And some of us aren't aware of that.
And some of that has changed too because of the we talked about last night at dinner, social media, the exposure to all this information that kids, when we were kids, we didn't see or access to until we got older. Kids are exposed to so much now, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
They are.
And it's having an impact.
It's having a huge impact. They say that kids today get their information not from their parents or their families.
Twitter.
They get it from the media directly, whereas we were sheltered from that. We didn't watch those sorts of things when we were kids. And they also say that the average father spends 8 minutes a day with their child and the average mother 11.
That's it.
That's it. So
the rest of the time they're on a device,
it's the external
cell
world.
phone or a video game, or they're on Twitter tweeting, and yeah. So that's where you see the rise of bullying and all these other things that are coming as a result. You're seeing a lot of changes. You were in higher education, so you were working with students, and now you're working directly, with all of these incredible people. And how has technology, how has the ramping up of our society impacted us in ways that have been great and in ways not so great?
Well, the ways that are great, without doubt, we can be anywhere in the world and get work done and communicate and make things happen, and that's really exciting to be able to have those kinds of connections and relationships and be anywhere. The part that I find is pretty similar and very sad is the huge amounts of anxiety. We're constantly, and it doesn't matter what level we're at, if we're at the frontline employee or if we're at the executive level, people are anxious. They're worried they're not enough. They're worried about, am I going to have a job? Where's tomorrow going to go? So when we have all this anxiety, the reality is we're not in our right brain. We're not in a place where we are at our best or can be at our best because we're in a fear state. When we're in a fear state, we're in the part of our brain that controls fight, flight, freeze. We're in the part of our brain that says protect yourself or defend yourself. Well, that's not about how we can have a great relationship and have a great conversation.
Right.
So unfortunately, that, because of society and this moving at the speed of a nanosecond and results, and quarterly results and financial driven, and all these pressures that we have, the pressure is to the negative rather than the positive. And if you want people to perform and perform well, they have to look forward, not look back. And they have to be inspired, and they have to be positive. But too often we're not being positive. What we're hearing is the negative.
The light is not being shined on the positive, right? It's more, it sells more, to see the negative and to see the things that are just not necessarily reinforcing for relationships and for society. It's really crucial to sort of alter our mindset, isn't it? Tell us about that, why it's important.
That's what it comes down to, and that's why we don't really learn from, or we learn from the TED Talks and the podcasts and all this great content that's out there. We don't embrace it. And we don't embrace it because we don't literally start to say, how can I make this different in my head? And this is a challenge that I give to people all the time. What's the voice in your head saying? See, there's 2 of us in this room having a conversation, but the reality is there's 4. And there's maybe more, because you're not listening to me, and I'm not listening to you. You're listening to the voice in your head talk about what you think I'm saying.
What was that?
Exactly. And I'm doing the same to you. Sure. And that's no disrespect. This is how the listening brain works. And you have to think about the things that I'm saying, and you can only do that based on what you know.
Sure.
So if you know something about it, you're like, okay, I know that.
Then you have the interest and you want to pursue it further.
Right. And if it kind of sounds like something but really isn't, you'll still incorporate it in. If you don't know anything about it, you're like, not listening to that. If you completely disagree with it, how often are you having a disagreement in your head with what I'm saying or anyone else that you speak to on a regular basis? So we're really not listening to each other. We're listening to the voice in our heads think about what it is that this person is saying. And in order to do that, we shut off and we turn back on. And we shut off and we turn back on as we're trying to process that information. And then in the shutting off, we miss even more of what that person is ultimately saying.
Well, today everybody's talking at as opposed to taking time to listen for different perspectives and different wisdom and different ideas. And I'm somebody who, like you, I really enjoy listening because when I'm listening, not only am I focused, but I'm also picking up little nuggets about life and how to handle different situations that maybe I didn't think of before, so I can add it to my repertoire of how I handle things in relationships and career and on the highway driving or whatever it is, how you react to things. So listening is really important and can be fantastic.
It can be.
If you allow yourself, you don't always have to be rah, 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 because we're living in a world right now where it's all, you listen to what I have to say. What you have to say is invalid if it doesn't agree with what I have to say and my views are. And that doesn't create any sort of cohesiveness or communal, situations or relationships. So we are meant to be communal and communicative, right?
We are. We're mammals, after all. We're mammals, which means we are herd animals, pack animals. We're a wolf pack. We're a zebra herd. We're a gorilla troop. We're the peeps, we're the family, we're the gang, whatever you want to call us, but we need to be together.
Right.
And we're screaming, some of us, to get our point across. And we think we're getting our point across, and sadly, we even get rewarded internally from that screaming. The minute I raise my voice, and the minute I start to scream and really get aggressive and get my point across, I get a dopamine hit.
Yeah.
Which means I feel good by doing that.
Right.
So since I feel good, you must have heard. And yet the reality is the minute I raise my voice, you're physiologically, your ears shut off. You can't hear.
No.
And you can't think in a proper manner because you're being attacked.
Right.
So all of this screaming that people are doing and feeling the need to really beat the band and get their points across are having the opposite impact